after walking her dog in Paisley, Scotland. One day in February of 2024, 41-year-old holistic therapist Kelly Sherry's hand and wrist became irritated. She developed a painful rash which initially felt like a friction burn, and the condition of her skin worsened, despite her efforts to clean the irritated area. By the time Sherry woke up the next morning, blisters had developed, forcing her to cancel appointments with her clients. She went to the doctor, who determined that the rash was caused by a poisonous plant called giant hogweed. This invasive species, which was introduced into England during the 19th century, contains sap which causes severe irritation when it comes into contact with human skin and is exposed to sunlight. It can also cause blindness, and while blisters and lesions usually disappear within a matter of days, symptoms can last for years. Sherry didn't recall touching or even seeing the plant during her walk, leading her to suspect that she came into contact with the sap while petting her own or someone else's dog. Her doctor prescribed antibiotics, antihistamines, and a steroid cream. After experiencing the unpleasant effects of giant hogweed firsthand, she urged others to be vigilant about their surroundings and to wash the skin immediately if they come into contact with the plant. Number 19. Grace Rolloff. In July of 2024, 20-year-old Grace Rolloff and her father, Jonathan Rolloff, were thrilled to learn that they had been granted permits to hike Yosemite National Park's Half Dome Rock Formation. On the assigned date of their trek, they drove from their home in Phoenix, Arizona to the park, which is located in California's Sierra Nevada mountains. A ranger warned appeared that there was a chance of storms later in the day, but the clear skies held out long enough for Grace and Jonathan to reach the top of the half dome. At almost the same exact moment, the father-daughter duo noticed a storm cloud rolling in. They tried to hurry back down the half dome's infamous 400-foot cables, which enable hikers to complete the final part of the ascent without rock climbing equipment. During their descent, the Rolloffs got stuck behind some less experienced climbers and chose not to pass them because they didn't want to seem rude. It began to rain. The mountain quickly became slippery, and Grace's new hiking boots failed to provide the amount of traction she had expected. She started to worry, so Jonathan reassured her that they would take things one step at a time. Then, in the blink of an eye, Grace slipped and fell down the mountain face, plunging 200 feet to her death. An autopsy revealed that she died from a head fracture after hitting her head on a rock. According to the National Park Service, relatively few people have fallen and died on the cables. But the agency admits that injuries are not uncommon, and the chances of getting hurt or dying increase during storms. In the wake of his daughter's death, Jonathan Rolloff told news station KPNX that he hopes to work with the MPS with the goal of preventing these types of tragedies in the future. Number 18. Ruth Holroyd. 47-year-old Ruth Holroyd nearly died during an evening out at a pub in Buckinghamshire, England, in November of 2018 when she had a life-threatening allergic reaction to her dinner. Holroyd suffers from multiple severe allergies, including to nuts and dairy, so she's extremely mindful about what she eats. Prior to her pub outing, she provided an employee with a list of foods she can't have, just like she had done ahead of previous visits. She had never experienced any issues in the past, but this time, her dietary restrictions were never passed on to the kitchen staff, and Holroyd was served a salmon dish containing milk, cream, and cheese. Within moments of finishing her food, she developed a rash, began struggling to breathe, and started to drift in and out of consciousness. She became unresponsive as paramedics rushed her to the hospital, where she woke up hours later. When Holroyd noticed that she was hooked up to various machines, she realized how close she had come to dying. She began to suffer from severe anxiety and insomnia and became scared to leave her house, forcing her to quit her job while she focused on her mental health. Holroyd eventually worked past her trauma and returned to work, but the incident changed her in lasting ways. She gets nervous about eating at restaurants and sometimes avoids ordering food entirely when she goes out, especially on first dates. The pub was fined nearly $30,000 for food safety violations, and Holroyd sued the business in civil court. She currently works at a school and runs the What Allergy blog, where she discusses the struggles of managing her severe allergies and offers advice to others who suffer from similar health conditions. Number 17. Iona McNeel. 38-year-old British national Iona McNeel was backpacking in Mexico in late 2021 when her leg began to itch during a hike on Monkey Mountain in Nayarit. Assuming it was nothing serious, she went to bed, hoping her symptoms would subside by morning. She awoke at 6 a.m. with nausea and was in so much pain she could barely walk. Realizing her condition was much more serious than she had originally thought, McNeel went to the hospital. She fell unconscious twice along the way as her legs swelled and began to turn purple. After arriving at the emergency room, she sat down in the waiting area and started convulsing as her body alternated between feeling extremely hot and breaking out in cold sweats. Doctors determined that McNeel had been bitten by a brown recluse spider, also known as the violin spider. It's considered one of the world's deadliest arachnid species. A bite can be fatal if left untreated, as McNeel learned from the close call she experienced after waiting to seek medical help. She received antibiotics at the emergency room but was told that she needed to relocate to a bigger hospital for further care, so she returned to the UK and checked into London's Hospital for Tropical Diseases. An insect bite specialist determined that the spider's venom had left McNeel's system, but she was now suffering from a bacterial infection called cellulitis. Her mental health began to seriously suffer while she spent the holidays in the hospital, wondering if her leg would ever make a full recovery. Thankfully, her health began to improve considerably after several days and only continued to get better from there, reassuring McNeel that her leg was not destroyed like she had feared. Number 16. Tina Watson. After tying the knot in Alabama in 2003, 26-year-old Tina Watson and her husband, Gabe, honeymooned in Australia. The newlyweds' vacation took a tragic turn when Tina died during a dive to the SS Yongala shipwreck off the Queensland coast. Gabe claimed that Tina had been overpowered by an unexpectedly strong current and sank nearly 100 feet to the ocean floor after falling unconscious. He rose to the surface and yelled for help, and a dive master sprang into action. Unfortunately, by the time Tina was removed from the water, it was too late to save her life. When detectives asked Gabe why he didn't try to rescue his wife despite being a trained diver, he claimed that an ear infection prevented him from diving any deeper than he already had. In the meantime, witnesses came forward with claims that they had seen Gabe wrapping Tina in a bear hug underwater while she flailed around in an apparent attempt to escape from him. Detectives theorized that Gabe had purposely cut off Tina's air supply and held her underwater with plans to cash in on a $33,000 life insurance policy, but they lacked enough evidence to arrest him at the time, and he returned to the United States as the investigation continued. In 2008, nearly 5 years after Tina's death, Australian authorities charged Gabe with murder. He fought extradition but was eventually sent to Australia to face the matter in court. Prosecutors accused him of giving 16 different versions of the events leading up to Tina's death and argued that none of these stories matched up with eyewitness accounts of what had happened. The defense, on the other hand, claimed that it was realistic to believe that Tina had died at the hands of an unexpectedly strong current, considering her lack of scuba diving experience. Gabe pleaded guilty to manslaughter and served a 1-year prison sentence. He was then extradited to the US, where he also faced a murder charge in connection with Tina's death. The case was dismissed based on a lack of evidence, but many remain convinced that David either murdered Tina or at least knowingly allowed her to die when he had an opportunity to save her. Number 15. Zachary Porter. In May of 2023, 20-year-old college student Zachary Porter traveled from Lake Bluff, Illinois to Alaska, where he and some friends hiked through the notorious mudflats of a treacherous estuary called the Turnagain Arm. Things were going fine until Porter got sucked into some quicksand like silt near the town of Hope, where he became hopelessly stuck in the waist-deep substance. Emergency responders and Porter's friends raced against the clock to try rescuing him as the incoming tide rolled in, but they were unable to free him, leaving them with no choice but to helplessly look on as he became submerged and drowned. His body was retrieved the next morning after the water had receded. This was not the first time someone met their fate in the infamous mudflats, but Porter's death marked the first tragedy of its kind in decades. Located in the Kenai Peninsula, the 48-mile-long Turnagain Arm was carved out by glaciers during the last ice age. It has one of the world's fastest incoming tides. causing solid ground to liquefy with little to no warning. This creates a vacuum-like effect with the capability of sucking a person in so hard that it would be impossible for them to escape, which is precisely what happened to Porter. Over the years, several people have gotten stuck in the mud flats and were lucky enough to be rescued before it was too late. Number 14. Jessica Kulka and Brian Molito. 39-year-old anesthesiologist Jessica Kulka and her husband, Brian Molito, had been married for less than a year when they traveled from Atlanta, Georgia to the Caribbean island of Grenada for a romantic getaway. During a sunrise stroll through a mangrove near the coastline one morning, Kulka frantically called Molito's name from nearby. An enormous machete-wielding stranger was dragging her away from the trail and into the vegetation at knife point. Not knowing what else to do, Molito initially followed the kidnapper, thinking he would return Kulka in exchange for ransom. But Kulka told her husband to run, so he did. He went to the police, who found Kulka's lifeless body lying face down near a pond shortly after the abduction. She had been brutally bludgeoned and strangled to death by her captor, who was identified as a 26-year-old local resident named David Benjamin. Just months earlier, Benjamin had been released from prison after serving time for assaulting a woman. He turned himself in to law enforcement the day after Kulka's death and was charged with murder. Molito regretted following his wife's instruction to run away, but investigators believed that he would have also been murdered if he hadn't fled the scene, and that there was nothing he could have done to stop Benjamin from killing Kulka. Benjamin never discussed the motive for the horrific crime or showed any remorse for his actions, but he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life without parole. Number 13. Li Fai Ada Huang. When 22-year-old Li Fai Ada Huang set out for a solo hike on Mount Baldy in California's San Gabriel Mountains in February of 2024. She had no idea that her timing couldn't have been worse. During her trek, an atmospheric river dumped heavy rain and snow throughout the region. At first, she sent photos and videos of the rough conditions to her friends and family, but she eventually stopped responding to their messages. When Huang failed to return home by 11 p.m. that night, her already concerned loved ones became even more worried about her. They tried to search for her on their own, but didn't make it far past the trailhead due to the inclement weather. Fearing the worst but hoping for the best, they reported Huang missing, but even professional search efforts were hindered by heavy flooding and the risk of avalanches. 5 days after Huang vanished, a civilian spotted her body with their drone. The weather was still bad and her remains were finally recovered 2 days later. While her cause of death was never revealed, it's not unusual for hikers to run into problems on Mount Baldy, which is notorious for its treacherous terrain. More than 10 people have died on the mountain, and law enforcement has carried out over 100 search and rescue operations. In recent years, Huang was used to hiking alone, but she may have lacked experience hiking in heavy rain and snow, according to her friends. And even a seasoned hiker is taking risks by attempting to conquer Mount Baldy alone. Number 12. The Esmond family. In 2015, Steve Esmond, his wife, Dr. Teresa Devine, and their 2 teenage sons, Sean and Ryan, took a family trip from their home in Delaware to the U.S. Virgin Islands. 4 days into the trip, they all began having seizures and were rushed from their hotel on the island of St. John to the hospital. They were ultimately airlifted back to the U.S. mainland for medical treatment. And 4 of the emergency responders who answered their call for help also got sick. As it turned out, everyone who fell ill had been poisoned by an odorless pesticide called methyl bromide, which can cause deadly respiratory and nervous system damage. It's banned for residential use, but had been used by 2 Terminix employees to fumigate a neighboring unit. Sean and Ryan Esmond spent several weeks in medically induced comas. 6 months after the incident, they were still barely able to move, which meant that sports were no longer part of the once highly athletic teens' future plans. Doctors were unsure whether the brothers would fully recover, but they said it was likely that at least some of the damage was irreversible. Steve Esmond was left permanently paralyzed, unable to speak and incapable of performing many basic everyday tasks, forcing an end to his career as a long-time school principal. Following an investigation, authorities charged Terminix manager Jose Rivera with 4 counts of improper use of a restricted pesticide. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to a year in prison. The Esmond family sued the parent company of Terminix and was awarded an $87 million settlement for their suffering and the lasting impacts that the incident has had on their lives. Number 11. Suzanne Eaton. In July of 2019, 59-year-old molecular biologist Suzanne Eaton traveled from her home in Dresden, Germany, to the Greek island of Crete for a work conference. She was scheduled to give a presentation during the event but was nowhere to be found on the day of her planned lecture, prompting her colleagues to report her missing. Investigators found Eaton's cell phone and personal belongings in her hotel room, leading to the suspicion that she had been abducted during her daily afternoon walk. Nearly a week later, a pair of search volunteers found Eaton's body 200 feet inside a cave that had been used as a bunker during World War II. She had been beaten and strangled to death and had several broken ribs and facial bones. Tire tracks near the cave indicated that the attacker had driven Eaton to the cave entrance and forced her inside, where he viciously assaulted and killed her. Surveillance footage, eyewitness accounts, and other evidence led investigators to a 27-year-old married father of 2 named Yannis Paraskakis, who lived in the town that Eaton had disappeared from. He confessed to the crime, claiming he was possessed by demons, and was charged with murder. Paraskakis changed his story after his arrest, claiming that his confession had been coerced and that he had accidentally run Eaton over with his car, but his denial failed to hold up in court, especially after more than 7 women came forward and accused Paraskakis of trying to abduct them. The survivors testified during the trial, telling the court that they credited their survival to nearby joggers who overheard them yelling for help and rushed to their aid. Paraskakis was found guilty as charged and sentenced to life in prison. Number 10. Tabias Cunningham. 23-year-old Tabias Cunningham was playing pickup basketball at a gym in Columbus, Ohio, in March of 2023 when he was shot dead on the court. Police identified the suspected shooter as an opposing player, 19-year-old Tavon Bush. According to prosecutors, Bush approached Cunningham on the court a half hour after losing a game against his team, then shot him. He turned himself into law enforcement 2 weeks after the shooting and was charged with 8 felonies, including murder, aggravated murder, inducing panic resulting in injury, carrying a concealed firearm, and more. Taking the stand in his own defense, Bush claimed that Cunningham had threatened him during an argument about a hard foul. He was found guilty of murder, inducing panic, and 2 weapon-related counts, and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 23 years. Number 9. Sabine Maro. In January of 2013, 67-year-old Sabine Maro left her home in Solre-sur-Sambre, Belgium, to pick up a friend at a train station 38 miles away in Brussels. But the senior citizen missed her destination and ended up driving 1,800 miles through 6 different countries before ending up in Zagreb, Croatia. Maro passed through multiple clearly marked border crossings throughout the 2-day drive without noticing that the language on the road signs had changed, and even stopped to get gas and take a nap before it dawned on her that she had gone way off course. By then she had driven through Belgium, France, Germany, Austria, and Slovenia, and was in Croatia. Her friend had found another ride from the train station and her son had reported her missing. Authorities were about to launch a large-scale search when Maro called her family to let them know what had happened. 60 hours and a lot of wasted gas and time later, she arrived back home. She claimed that her TomTom GPS caused her to take a wrong turn, and also blamed distraction, telling the news outlet El Mundo that she was simply too preoccupied to notice obvious indicators that she was no longer in Belgium. Number 8. Jazella and Klaus Pfleger. While visiting their daughter in Southern California in May of 1994, a German couple in their 60s named Jazella and Klaus Pfleger decided to do some sightseeing in the San Jacinto Mountains. During a stop in the town of Idlewild, 3 men approached the senior citizens and robbed them at gunpoint. As Jazella fought to hold onto her purse, one of the thieves shot her twice in the head, killing her at the scene. Claus was shot 3 times, including once in the face, and was unable to talk but managed to drive to a nearby town where he wrote a note explaining the situation and gave it to a stranger. Jazella's body was recovered from the crime scene and Claus was taken to a nearby hospital. He survived with serious injuries which required reconstructive surgery. Investigators concluded that Jazella and Claus showed no outward signs of being from another country, ruling out the likelihood that they were targeted because they were tourists. They identified a teenager named Thongshay Nilakaut as the shooter and 20-year-old Kamchan Brett Ketsovanasane as the man who wrestled with Jazella over her handbag, while 20-year-old Zhu Yang acted as both the mastermind and the getaway driver. Yang pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was paroled in 2015 after serving part of a 25-year to life sentence. Nilakaut and Kamchan were both found guilty and sentenced to life without parole. But Nilakaut won a new sentence hearing in 2012 following the introduction of a new law classifying life sentences for people who were minors when they were convicted as unconstitutional. He was paroled in 2023 after serving 28 years. Number 7. Eileen Christie. In July of 2016, a 72-year-old nun from Long Island, New York, named Eileen Christie took a solo vacation to Hallstatt, Austria. 6 days into the trip, she stopped responding to emails from her friends and family, and all her banking activity stopped. Her credit cards, money, clothing, and other belongings were found in her hotel room after she failed to check in at another hotel she planned to stay at. The only things missing from the room other than Christie herself were a swimsuit and some shoes, leading investigators to believe that she had left the room to go swimming and for some reason never made it back. Those who knew the nun grew extremely worried, especially knowing that it was customary for her to check in with her family regularly and that she did not lead a high-risk lifestyle. Christie had traveled to Austria at least a dozen times in the past without any issues, which only heightened their concerns. Authorities performed through land, air, and water searches in the area, but did not find Christie. Theorizing that she may have drowned, they searched for her shoes near a local lake, since she would have removed them to go swimming, but the footwear was also nowhere to be found, and Christie's whereabouts remain a mystery to this day. A New York-based private investigator was hired to look into the case, and he concluded that the owner of the hotel Christie disappeared from had made contradicting statements about his interactions with her on the day she vanished. But law enforcement said that they had interviewed the owner to the fullest allowable legal extent and believed he was innocent of any wrongdoing. If Christie did not meet with foul play, it means she likely either went hiking or swimming, and her remains have not yet been found. All efforts to find her have been suspended, and Christie's friends and loved ones have accepted that she's probably no longer alive. Number 6. Geraldine Lar. During the spring of 2013, 66-year-old Geraldine Lar attempted to hike the famous Appalachian Trail with her friend Jane Lee. They began their trek in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, and hiked nearly 1,000 miles before Lee had to cut her trip short in New Hampshire due to a family emergency. Lar continued alone despite her lack of experience with hiking and navigating, and she went radio silent less than 200 miles from the trail's northern end in western Maine. She had taken a wrong turn on the trail more than once, had a poor sense of direction, and didn't know how to use a compass, according to Lee, who said she feared that Lar had gotten in over her head. An intensive search turned up no sign of the missing woman, and for more than 2 years her family suffered in anguish from not knowing what had happened to her. Finally, in October of 2015, her remains were found in her tent less than 2 miles from the trail. Lar had kept a diary during her final days which described how she had gotten lost after stepping away from the trail to use the bathroom. She survived for nearly a month on what little food and water she still had before starving to death. In her heartbreaking final diary entry, Lar scribbled out a request for whoever found her body to contact her husband and daughter making it clear that she knew she was dying. An official investigation concluded that she was ill-prepared to hike the trail alone. If Largay had known how to navigate properly, she could have made it back to the trail from the site where her remains were found in a half hour or less, serving as a sobering reminder of how quickly things can go catastrophically wrong when an amateur hiker bites off more than they can chew. Number 5. Nick Friska. During a trip to Cape Town, South Africa in February of 2023, 22-year-old German national Nick Friska went hiking alone along the Hangberg Trail, which is famous for its scenic beauty. He vanished while climbing up Sentinel Peak and hasn't been seen since. Numerous searches failed to turn up any sign of the missing man, whose last known movements were documented on a hiking app. The information revealed that Friska strayed off path a few times and used the app to navigate back to the trail. He had nearly reached the summit when he suddenly stopped. The app recorded a series of movements back to the start of the trail, then to the summit, then back to the trailhead. Investigators believe this seemingly sporadic activity occurred when Friska met with foul play, while his body remains missing. His backpack, cell phone, and credit card were found in the possession of a group of young men who admitted to robbing Friska but claimed that he ran off and that they have no idea what happened to him after that. Despite the absence of any remains, authorities have charged Ikshan Fisher, Jason Abrahams, Van Roy Peterson, Carlo Guenantin, and Melvin Guenantin with Friska's murder. Prosecutors are accusing the defendants of robbing Friska at gunpoint and knifepoint, and they believe that the accused killers are responsible for at least 2 other robberies that occurred in the area within days of Friska's disappearance. The search for the missing hiker was eventually called off. In the meantime, the suspects have declined to apply for bail, but do not seem keen on admitting that they did anything other than rob Friska, leaving his family to grapple with the uncertainty surrounding his fate. Number 4. Joreen Richards. In a disturbing tragedy that occurred off the shore of Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic in April of 2023. A 67-year-old American tourist named Joreen Richards was accidentally left behind by her group during a snorkeling trip. Her body was later found floating face down in a life vest off Bibijagua Beach. According to media reports, the tour guides did not count the number of people on the boat before leaving the snorkeling site. Following an investigation, authorities arrested the boat's captain and 2 employees in connection with the case. Speaking with Dominican Today, a prosecutor explained that the country's laws prevent them from charging the tour company, resulting in their decision to pursue the cases at the individual level. At the time, the suspects were each potentially facing a criminal negligence charge, which carries a sentence of up to 2 years behind bars. The current status of the case is unclear. Number 3. Gloria Serge. 85-year-old Gloria Serge of Fort Pierce, Florida hardly had time to react when an alligator charged at her while she was walking her dog, Trooper, in March of 2023. As soon as she spotted the 10-foot-long reptile emerging from a pond near her house, Serge began walking away from the water's edge, but she was unable to outrun the gator, which charged at Trooper first, then attacked the senior citizen when the dog ran away. Disturbing footage captured by a nearby wildlife camera showed Serge being dragged into the pond. An elderly neighbor tried to help by encouraging Serge to swim toward a paddle boat, but the alligator had no plans to release its grip on her, rendering her helpless in the water. By the time the neighbor grabbed the pole with plans to either strike the alligator or pull Serge out of the pond, she had slipped beneath the surface, never to re-emerge. Emergency responders pulled Serge from the water but were unable to revive her. And while alligator attacks are rare, even in Florida, the unexpected tragedy prompted local officials to remind the public to be vigilant about the possibility. Today's topic was requested by Taxit and Kathy8013. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Lucas McLeish. On a hot June morning in 2024, 34-year-old Lucas McLeish set out on a 3-hour hike to explore a granite outcropping in California's Big Basin Redwood State Park. A number of landmarks he had planned to rely on were no longer present due to a forest fire in recent years, causing him to become disoriented. As he tried to find his way, he became even more lost in the vast, sprawling wilderness. McLeish vanished for 10 days while massive search efforts to find him were undertaken. He was finally located after searchers overheard him calling for help and searched the area with a drone. When he first emerged from the woods, he was shirtless, covered in mud and suffering from brush burns and scratches to his back and arms. During his time in the forest, McLeish had lost 30 pounds. While surviving on berries and drinking water he collected from streams with his boot. Considering the circumstances he had endured, which included falling and sliding down a 150-foot boulder, he emerged from the ordeal relatively unscathed. McLeish told the Daily Mail that he was enjoying the landscape so much that he didn't initially worry when he began to get lost. As an experienced hiker and outdoorsman, he figured he would eventually find his way, but he became increasingly concerned as time passed. And by his 5th day in the forest, his urgency to find his way back to civilization increased. He especially struggled during the cold nights, which made it difficult to sleep. Despite the harrowing near-death experience, McLeish hasn't lost his love for the outdoors. But he admitted that he had failed to be mindful about several precautions and other things which could help to prevent a similar situation from happening in the future. If you thought these harmless activities couldn't get any worse, then find out how bad it can get when family is involved. We've got our previous release of When Family Feuds Go Wrong coming up right after number 1, so stay tuned. Number 1. GPS shortcut leads driver into danger. Most Americans celebrate on the 4th of July, but one Utah man spent his holiday stranded on Strawberry Peak in Wasatch County. After getting stuck late at night, he dialed 911 and explained that he had driven his Toyota Tercel up the mountain along a dirt road after Google recommended the route as a shortcut. It took Wasatch County deputies 3 hours to free the man's car and assist him down the mountain. Thankfully, he emerged from the ordeal uninjured. A Google spokesperson told People magazine that the company prioritizes safety and will make any necessary changes to its navigation system, but that they had not identified any roads leading to the location where the man ended up. A family dispute escalated into an all-out brawl in the Mickey's Toontown section of Disneyland on July the 6th of 2019. A video recorded by an uninvolved bystander captured the entire ordeal and subsequently went viral. The footage showed a man in a pink shirt identified as Avery Robinson, aged 35, aggressively shouting at a woman pushing a stroller, who was later revealed to be Avery's 40-year-old sister, Andrea Robinson. Andrea spits in her brother's face, triggering a physical altercation between the two siblings that also came to involve Andrea's husband, Damon Petrie. Avery's girlfriend also intervened in the struggle after she'd initially attempted to break up the fight. Punches were thrown from all sides as onlookers gathered around the skirmish. A few people even tried to step in and stop the violence as shown at various stages of the 4-minute video. An elderly woman in a mobility scooter, identified as Avery's mother, was knocked over at one point, while the children in the stroller were pulled out of harm's way by concerned witnesses. When park security finally showed up at the scene, the incident had already come to a conclusion. Upon being interviewed by Anaheim police, members of the Robinson family outright denied that a fight between them had ever taken place. Their assertions were promptly disproven when the authorities got a hold of the viral video chronicling the brawl. All 3 of the individuals primarily responsible for the altercation were criminally charged, with Avery Robinson being sentenced to 6 months in prison in February of 2020. Andrea Robinson and Damon Petrie failed to show up for their trials, and warrants were then issued for their arrests. They faced maximum sentences of 2.5 years and 6 months in jail, respectively. Number 7. Heidi Creamer and Holly Ryan. On December the 7th of 2014, a 48-year-old Florida woman assaulted her twin sister after the two got into a dispute over an adult toy. Heidi Creamer shared an apartment in Bradentown with her boyfriend and her sister, Holly Ryan. The two siblings reportedly had some sort of heated disagreement that afternoon regarding Creamer's partner and an intimate device she owned. Creamer escalated the argument by physically attacking her sister. Ryan was punched, scratched, and her hair was pulled over the course of the altercation. Creamer then gathered all of her belongings and brought them outside. at which point Ryan locked her sister out of the apartment. The injured woman went out on the balcony and began calling out to her neighbors for help. The authorities were contacted, and the police officer who arrived at the scene found a bloodied Ryan still on the balcony. Creamer was subsequently arrested and taken to Manatee County Jail. She had previously faced charges of drunk driving and assault in connection to unrelated incidents from her past. Number 6. Solange Knowles and JayZ. After attending a Met Gala after-party on May the 5th of 2014, Brooklyn rap mogul JayZ was violently attacked by his sister-in-law, Solange Knowles, in the elevator of a Manhattan hotel. Surveillance footage from the hotel security cameras was subsequently distributed online by tabloid news outlet TMZ. The video depicted the rapper still donning the white tuxedo he'd worn to the gala as he is repeatedly punched and kicked by an enraged Knowles. All the while, his wife, renowned music artist Beyoncé, watched on. Knowles was eventually pulled off by a bodyguard who was in the elevator with the celebrity trio. There were subsequent reports that Knowles had been involved in multiple bizarre interactions throughout the evening, including an argument with fashion designer Rachel Roy. At the post-gala event, Knowles had become intoxicated and belligerent. Tension soon boiled over in the elevator when JayZ made a remark to which Knowles took exception. While the incident was widely publicized due to the fame and popularity of the individuals involved, both JayZ and Knowles have consistently downplayed their feud's significance in the years since. Number 5. Sylvester Aori and Barbara Tommy. A pastor and self-proclaimed prophet by the name of Sylvester Aori, aged 35, fatally shot his estranged wife outside the bank where she worked on September the 8th of 2020. The murder of 27-year-old Barbara Tommy occurred just a day after a heated confrontation between Aori and Tommy's brother, during which the pastor claimed he would be a fake man of God if he didn't kill his wife. Aori also referred to Tommy as a witch during the video-recorded shouting match. Tommy's brother advised her to file a police report following her husband's threat, but she expressed hesitancy to do so for fear of escalating the situation even further. An armed Aori confronted Tommy at her place of work the following morning. Witnesses described seeing the man holding a firearm as he followed his wife to the front doors of the Navy Federal Credit Union in Orlando, Florida. Tommy knocked on the door hoping someone would let her inside, at which point Aori fired multiple rounds into her head. He walked back to his car and drove away as if nothing had happened, according to bank patrons at the scene of the crime. Police officers were alerted and they found Aori at his apartment. Later that day, he was arrested on a charge of first-degree murder. Number 4. Adam Roth. On March the 10th of 2020, a 36-year-old man named Adam Roth stabbed 4 of his family members, killing 2 of them while they were sharing a meal in the kitchen of their home in Waukesha, Wisconsin. Roth reportedly first took the knife to his wife, Dominique, stabbing her multiple times. As the rest of the family watched on in horror, Dominique's mother and her 2 sisters pleaded with Roth to stop, at which point he turned his attention towards the others and attacked them as well. The vicious onslaught led to the deaths of Roth's wife, sister-in-law, and the family dog, while his other sister-in-law and mother-in-law were both badly injured. In an interview with law enforcement the following day, Roth divulged the motivation for his gruesome crime. He had apparently grown increasingly paranoid that the coronavirus would infect his family, and the violent outburst was his purported way of saving them from the infectious disease. While he admitted to the attacks, Roth pleaded not guilty by reason of mental illness to multiple charges of first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. According to doctors ordered to evaluate Roth's mental health, the man had experienced a decline in his psychiatric stability in the period leading up to the deadly incident. Number 3. Jeffrey Burnham. A pharmacist named Brian Robinette was shot dead in Ellicott City, Maryland, by his brother, who claimed Robinette was killing people by administering them the COVID-19 vaccine. In addition to his brother, 46-year-old Burnham also claimed the lives of his sister-in-law and his mother's childhood friend, Rebecca Reynolds, during his deranged killing spree, which occurred on September the 30th of 2021. The first victim was Reynolds, aged 83. She was stabbed to death inside her home, after which Burnham absconded with her car, driving 2 hours in order to confront his brother. Police investigating Reynolds' murder found the stolen vehicle not far from Robinette's residence. When they went to the pharmacist's home to ask about his brother's whereabouts, they discovered that both Robinette and his wife had succumbed to fatal gunshot wounds. The ensuing manhunt for Burnham continued into the following week. He was eventually found in West Virginia and extradited back to Maryland. He was charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder. On several occasions prior to the deadly events, Burnham's mother had contacted the authorities to express concerns over her son's mental health and stability. Number 2. Samuel Hannah and Calvin Scott. An argument over a scratched car ultimately led to the fatal stabbing of 43-year-old Calvin Scott of East Orange, New Jersey, on February the 8th of 2021. Based on an account given by Scott's soon-to-be niece, Clarissa Price, police were able to determine that the man's death was precipitated by a hostile altercation he'd had with Price's uncle, Samuel Hannah. Scott reportedly blamed Hannah for a noticeable scrape on his car, for which Hannah subsequently denied all responsibility. The argument devolved into a physical altercation between the two men after Scott punched Hannah over the alleged scratching. The situation took a deadly turn when Hannah retaliated by pulling out a knife and thrusting it into his attacker several times. Scott was taken to University Hospital in Newark, but eventually passed away from his wounds. 7 family members had been living under the same roof for more than a year prior to the incident. Price claimed that tempers had been running high in the weeks and days leading up to the stabbing as a result of the cramped living space, and Scott's death was an unfortunate byproduct of the rising tensions. Number 1. The Gomez family Thanksgiving. On Thanksgiving Day 2018, Martina Gomez, aged 63, was killed by her niece in the midst of a brutal family fight in Lawrence, Massachusetts. 23-year-old Modesta Gomez had become embroiled in an argument with her cousin on Snapchat earlier that evening, before eventually deciding to drive to the family home in order to confront her in person. When Modesta arrived, her cousin was already on the floor and engaged in a physical conflict with another female relative. Modesta took the opportunity to strike her cousin while she was distracted on the ground. Martina then intervened in the altercation by grabbing hold of Modesta's hair. During the ensuing fight between the two, a punch thrown by Modesta connected and knocked her aunt unconscious. The police were contacted and showed up to the Gomez residence at about 10 p.m. They were notified of the brawl that had transpired between the family members earlier in the evening, and they proceeded to perform CPR on an unresponsive Martina Gomez. The victim was promptly transported to Lawrence General Hospital, where she would later pass away from the injuries inflicted by her niece. Modesta left the house once the fight had ended, but upon learning she was wanted by the authorities, turned herself in to the Lawrence Police Department. She was held in custody without bail as she awaited sentencing. Thanks for watching. Would you rather touch a giant hogweed or drink a cup of spoiled milk? Let us know in the comments section below.